Hello, Chief Architect users. I'm going to be going over a particular method I use for archiving projects, especially with the new Style Palette tool. And so what I have here is I've got the folder open where my user library exists. This is my existing user library. It's, over a gig in size. It's got a lot of symbols in it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder. We'll just call it backup. And I'm going to drag that user library into the backup folder. And so that when I open X-12, what's going to happen is it'll open, we'll open a project up, and then on the sidebar, it's going to show that it's loading my library. After it loads that library, the last little dialog update you'll see down here is that it's loading a user library. What that means is essentially it just created a new user catalog. So that if I go back to my folder, my database folder, you can see there that a user library folder now exists, whereas before we just dragged it into the backup. So my user library that's over a gig is still in that backup folder, but we've now created a new user library. And I'll tell you the reason I do this, and maybe it's not for everybody. It's just my personal preference, and I'll list a couple reasons why. But first off, I'm just going to pull this 3D view. It's going to take a while to generate because it's I've got a texture rich PBR set up on this camera that's saved. But after we load it, we're going to go in and we're going to save all the essentials that make this particular design stand out so that I can archive them and use them at a later time. And I'm going to save them into this new user catalog. And after we've created that new user catalog, I'm going to go back to the folder where it exists after I close out Chief Architect, and I'm going to go save it into some archived folder. That way, in the future, if I want to use it, I can drag it in and access it. Now, you could do this the same way by just exporting a cal-libs file, which is just going into your user library, creating a folder, and then right-clicking and clicking export. That's certainly a way that works, but every time that I want to then delete it, I have to delete it, I've got to empty my trash, and then I've got to import it when I want to bring it in, and it's going to load in. So that way works fine. I just have a preference that I use, and I'm going to illustrate here. At the same time, I'm going to illustrate some ways to think about using the Style Palette tool. So a couple things right off the bat. I know that I want to save this cabinet in my Style Palette. 3-drawer base, call it whatever you want. I could actually go figure out, what the door style is and save it based on that, and the color coding for the paint that's being used here, so that my cabinet vendor manufacturer, knows exactly what these bases are made of. But for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to call it 3-drawer. We're going to create Style Palette. There we go, 3-drawer. Now I can go ahead and create a style palette for the room. I can create style palette for all the adjacent rooms. I can save particular symbols into my library, right? Anything that you might want to have in this backup archive of this particular project. So I'm also going to go in and go to 3D, under materials, and then I'm going to create plan materials library. There we go, East 38th Plan Materials Library. And this is a great thing to do here because I can just drag this in here, and that's pretty much done, right? So I've got the East 38th Plan. There you go. That's all I wanted to save. Now, when I go through and just close out Chief Architect, no, I don't want to save the camera. This is going to be my East 38th project user library. And what I can do from here is I can take this straight into the manufacturer's library, copy to manufacturer's library. There we go. Now it's in the manufacturer's library. I'm going to delete it from here, and I'm going to go back to my backup, drag this back into my database library. So there's my user library. I also have a user library in the manufacturer's library, and let's see what happens when I open up X-12 again. Just allow this to load again. So underneath my user catalog, I have Rab's Desktop, which is my main user library. It's got a ton of symbols in there. It's all organized by folder. And also, look at that, we've got our East 38th plan. So I've effectively brought in an archived plan that I can then, drag into my regular user library or just apply to the active job that I'm working on. What a simple way of organizing and archiving past projects and their styles. And you can create multiple style palettes without having to create some kind of elaborate system within your existing user library, and then just have it outside of your user library and bring it in as needed. And I always recognize styles from jobs that I've done and the job names that I'm familiar with where I use those styles. So just a new method, another method for utilizing the style palette tools and also utilizing some tricks in the user library and the core locations. Just so you know, you can go to your preferences under Edit Preferences and look underneath the Folders tab under the General. Folders is a sub-tab of General tab. And here you can find all your program paths. Find out where your user library exists, keep user folder and library files in data folder. And that's under the Chief Architect Premier Desktop under the Documents folder in my OneDrive. So there you go. I hope that, opens some eyes for some people and help some people out